In the following section, we are going to talk a little more about application software. Now, applications typically comes with a primary purpose that they need to perform. For example, if you want to read your emails, you would typically go and install the email application. Now, they will also enable people to apply the power of the computer to work as individuals in workgroups or enterprises, and they will assist you in performing specific tasks and solving specific problems. Now let's look at the types and functions. Companies can go and decide to either develop their own programs or to purchase existing programs. Now, if they develop their own programs, this is typically known as proprietary software, where you're going to develop one-of-a-kind program for a specific application and purpose, and that program will be owned by the company, the organization, or person that uses it. Alternatively, you can go and buy software from websites, from stores, etc. And these software were basically created with the mass groups in mind. For example, vendors would go and they would try to address specific needs that are common in business organizations or for individuals. Now let's go and look at the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. So for proprietary, those that are unique, that are custom developed for companies, some of the advantages include the company will get exactly what they need in terms of features, reports, and functionality. The company would be involved throughout the development process, and they would have control over the results that will be embedded into this new application. They can decide to modify features that would enable them to counteract perhaps some of the competitiveness that's presented by the market segment itself. For example, if we think in terms of mobile developers, providers, one company can decide to develop a custom program which the others don't have in order to get that advantage. Now, there are some disadvantages. It can take a long time and significant resources to go and develop these software. It's usually very expensive. The in-house staff, if you have these available, might become hard-pressed to provide the required level of ongoing support and maintenance because they would continuously be pressed to move on to newer projects. So you need to make sure that you have the right staffing in place. And then lastly, if there's any features or new aspects to the software that you haven't tested, it might present you with some potential risks. So there's always a risk of it not working and affecting your company. Now let's look at off-the-shelf software. Now for the advantage side, it's initially cheaper because the software firm spread the cost of development amongst all the customers that buy the software. It will meet the basic business needs, and then what's nice about it, a lot of these do provide you with some demo programs that you can test beforehand before you decide to go and purchase the actual packages. And the third advantage is you're pretty much guaranteed that it would be of high quality because many people would have tested it, and you're guaranteed that there won't be many mistakes within the software. Now, as part of the disadvantages, it might happen that you as an organization or individual need to pay for features that you're not really going to use. But because they're present in the software, you pay for the whole software package. The software package might also lack some features that you would require. Let's say, for argument's sake, there's new developments or new demands on your company and you need to embed that in the software. Those developers wouldn't go and change their software just to cater for your particular needs. So it would be expensive because you would need to go and change your future approaches to working with the software. Number 3, the software might not match your current work processes and data standards. So it's important to make sure that your data in your organization, that data can be transported or transferred to this new software, and that everything is compatible. So before you buy software off the shelf, you need to ask yourself a few questions. Number one, will the software work on my operating system? And do I have the adequate hardware in place in order to run that software? Number two, will the software meet my business requirements and needs? If not, you're going to waste money and you're not going to use that software. Number three, is the software manufacturer financially solvent and reliable? It happens from time to time that people buy software from lesser known parties, and that 6 months, a year after the software has been bought, those people go bankrupt and that no support is available for you. And then again, you're going to have wasted a lot of resources. Number four, does the total cost of purchasing, installing and maintaining the software compare favorably to the expected business benefits? Now this comes down to the cost. If there's too many risks or if it's too expensive, then ultimately you would need to reconsider buying particular software. So always make sure that you really need that. We're going to talk about some definitions now that relates to software, and the first of these includes application service providers. Now, typically a few years back you would have found that if companies needed software, they would have gone and they would have developed it themselves. They would have had the skills in the company in order to do so. However, nowadays, there are some external companies that do provide you with the necessary support. So they will provide you with the software, the support and the hardware, and they will make sure that everything is available in your organization in order to run that software over a network. However, again, it involves some risks. As soon as you give control over to another company, there's always a risk that sensitive information might be compromised, so you need to have strict guidelines and rules. That service provider might not be able to keep their networks and computers up and running, so you might experience times where there's no service available, and then ultimately it's going to be a bad reflection on your company and customers that will be angry at you because you couldn't deliver what you promised. And then the third consideration is you need to make sure that if something happens to that service provider's data center, that they will still be able to have backup plans in place in order to support you and that your company can function. So there are certain risks involved. The next term that we need to refer to is cloud computing. Now, cloud computing is the use of any computing resources. Now, this can include software and data that you're going to access through the internet rather than your local devices. Now, why is it called cloud computing? Typically, people see it as it's not on your premises, it's situated somewhere else, but the whole process is so complicated, so it actually made it easier for them to just talk about the cloud versus saying that it should go through 20 networks in order to get to that same information. So it's just a way to give meaning to that for your ordinary users. So what we typically would find is with these types of software, and I'm referring to stuff like Google Drive, Dropbox, Gmail, etc. This would be mainly web-based software that is totally different from traditionally what we had as your installed software that you had to put on your hard disk. So all of this software would be accessed through a web browser, and then the functionality would be available within that browser. Any data that you generate within the software will also be saved on a web server. So the nice thing that this creates is if something happens to your computer, if you worked on the cloud and your content is saved on the cloud, that you can easily go and retrieve that content. Or if you're using multiple devices, multiple locations, that you again still have access to that information. Many companies are using this more and more because it provides them with an easy facility to go and share their documents with other individuals, either employees, customers, or partners. The next definition that we're going to refer to is known as software as a service. Now, with software as a service, there are companies available that would take all the difficult aspects out of software development, and they would handle all of that. So it's going to be a service that would allow your business to subscribe to web-based applications. Remember, we've spoken about RIA, and that you would go and pay either a monthly fee or a per usage fee. So again, we're starting to see these more oftenly in the form of perhaps Office 365, where it's a semi-web-based version, but you need to go and yearly renew your licenses. We find it with Adobe, where they've got the Creative Suite, and they've got also a cloud component, where again you in that case pay a monthly fee in order to access that software. Now, the good thing about this is the software would be maintained on that provider's infrastructure, and you would just go and access it over the internet. Again, you're going to use a browser in order to gain access, and it typically reduces the cost of the software because again now you can share it amongst various people, and the cost would be distributed equally amongst everybody. Now, when we talk about personal application software, it's important to realize that it's going to solve or address a specific need. People generally go and talk about user software or personal productivity software. So if you look at your cell phone and you look at the software on that cell phone, those are specific, dependent on your own needs and your own preferences. You might want or prefer to use certain packages, and you would enable or install those packages on your mobile phone or perhaps your computer. Now, some of these examples include word processing, spreadsheet analysis, data applications. We do get graphics programs, project management, financial management, desktop publishing, stuff like Microsoft Publisher, and then personal information managers. So these are just a few of the ones available. When we talk about software, we also need to talk about a concept called a software suite. Now, a software suite is a collection of single programs that are packaged together and that are sold as a bundle. And again, we do find it with something like Microsoft Office, where depending on the bundle that you select, you will get Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and then for the higher range bundles, you could get Access and other functionality. So a lot of programs combined into one. These programs are usually designed in such a manner that it makes it easy to jump from one program to another program, and the interfaces are relatively the same. So for example, if you know how to work with Microsoft Word, you will have little difficulty transitioning to, let's say, Microsoft PowerPoint. By packaging software together, it's again more cost effective, because ultimately if you would have gone and buy these one by one, it would have cost you more. And then what we see, the new trend is that we get web-based productivity software that requires no installation, and that in many cases can be obtained for free. And here we're thinking of applications perhaps provided by Google, such as Google Docs. Now let's continue and talk a little about mobile application software. Now, when you buy a mobile phone, you would typically find that there are some pre-installed software available on there, and these are usually determined by the service providers. So your MTNs and Vodacoms, they will decide what should be available on there, and then they would pre-install that. However, there are many other applications that you can go and download and buy from third-party suppliers. And we would typically find that there's various categories available. So nowadays you can go and search for anything from financial applications to games, to productivity, to self-management, motivation, etc. If we look in terms of Workgroup or Workgroup application software, these types of software are designed in such a manner that it facilitates teamwork and that it supports teamwork. It can be used at the same location, or it can support people if they are placed around various locations around the world. Now this software is also known as groupware. Now groupware will help groups of people to work together more effectively. Sometimes you would find that some people refer to it as collaborative software, and examples of this include, perhaps if we look at what Google offers, where they give you applications that would allow you to go and create documents, databases, spreadsheets, your Google Drive, your Gmail, the calendar, Google Maps, etc. So many people can interact with this software, and you can enable them to share documents and to trace the interaction with such software. If we look at the next sphere where we talk about enterprise application software, now these types of software, the aim is that it benefits the whole organization. So companies would typically move to an integrated enterprise software approach where it supports, for example, the whole supply chain management. So everything from inbound logistics to storage, warehousing, marketing, outbound logistics, all of that would be contained within the software. Whenever you buy enterprise software, you need to think about the cost and the installation, and then the ability to integrate with other software in your company. So it's not a very easy process. You need to make sure that everything is going to work and that it's going to run smoothly. More recently, we also see that people want versions that can be run on their smartphones, their mobile devices such as tablets and laptops. So you also need to make sure that it's going to run in those environments. Now, we also get software for other categories, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. For example, every industry, every organization would have their own needs, and they can base software on their own requirements. Now let's talk about a programming language. In order to have software, you need to create that software by creating a program or application. Now, what is a programming language? It can be defined as a set of keywords, commands, symbols, and a system of rules that will allow you to construct statements that people can use to communicate instructions to a computer. Now, the next logical thing that we need to talk about is programming. So what is programming? It's pretty much the translation of what your users or your customers want into such a manner that the computer understands what you're trying to do. So if you want to create an application, you would talk to your clients, you will tell them your needs and requirements, what kind of data should be recorded. That would be translated into statements, and then an application would be created that will fulfill that particular need. Now, where did all of this start? And I'm sorry about this, but this is again a little more technical again. Now, originally we started with various programming languages, referred to as generation languages, ranging from first generation to fourth, and then after that we refer to it as beyond fourth generation languages. The first generation was known as a machine language. It was developed around 1940s, and machine language worked with your bits, the zeros and the ones. Remember, we've spoken about this in your hardware, in your processing. A computer works with ones and zeros. So this was a very low-level approach to software development. Then we got the second generation in around the 1950s, known as assembly language. And in this case, they've taken the bits and they've associated certain combinations of bits with basic commands. So instead of remembering that whole range of numbers, you can just type in a small command and that would be translated to your machine language. For the third generation, also known as your higher level language, those were developed in the 1960s, and you will see if you look at the statement example, your instructions changed a bit and it became even easier to interpret and read. Going into fourth generation, your query and database languages, around the 1970s, we find that the instructions were created in such a manner that it made a little more sense, and that again it eased the way in which you could have gone and created programs. Now if we look at beyond fourth generation, which are your natural and intelligent languages, and this is typically from the 1980s upwards, we do find that now you can just go and type in a statement in such a manner that it's almost similar to a question or a remark, and the computer will go and analyze that in order to generate the program for you. So this is just for background interest if you want to know about it. What's more important is software bugs. Now, please take note that there's a difference between a software bug and a software virus, and I'm going to talk about them now. So let's start by looking at a software bug. A software bug is a defect in a computer program that keeps it from running as it was intended to run. For example, let's say you're creating an application that should track product sales, but instead of typing in your VAT amount as 14%, you change it to 15%. So it's just a small glitch with the software, but your calculations will be done incorrectly. So in most cases, you would find that these wouldn't have been intentional. It was just a coding error, and that it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Now, when you look at some of the software, some of the errors are more obvious to detect, whereas others might be very subtle, and it could take you days and years to find such errors. Now let's think about some tips to reduce the impact of software bugs. Now the following 6 tips are recommended for users, and unfortunately very few people do this, but it's generally accepted that you should go and register your software, and the reason for that is if there are any changes, fixes or patches to that software, they will contact you and tell you that there's a new update, please go and install the update, and these were the errors that we detected. It's also a good idea to go and check your manual or README files when you install that software or when you download it, because in many cases they will tell you that they're aware of a glitch, and that if it's something major, that there is a workaround for that particular glitch. The third one, you need to access the support area of the manufacturer's site for patches and updates, and in any case go and look for possible bugs that might have been reported by other users. The fourth one, you need to ensure that you install the latest software updates, because any changes would automatically be reflected and such occurrences would be taken out. If you find that you've got software with a bug, it's always important to think about the circumstances under which that bug occurred, because in many cases, because we're working with different hardware types, it might happen that a bug only occurs on a certain computer system in a certain specific environment when specific actions take place. So always try to take these down. So if you call the support personnel, that you can explain to them what did you do and how the problem occurred. The last one, many companies and people prefer to wait a little before they buy the latest software, and the reason for that is they rather wait for software to be released, let's say for 4 or 5 months, so that some of the bugs can be identified and corrected before they go and contribute and start buying any software. Now I said there's a difference between a software bug and a software virus. A software bug is unintentional, whereas a software virus has the intention to cause damage and harm to your computer system and your data. So please just take note of that. At this stage, we're not going to go into detail with software viruses, so please feel free to go and Google that. The next topic that we need to look at is your copyrights and licenses. Now, it's important to realize that all software products are protected by laws, and that we need to ensure that we follow the copyright and the licensing provisions. It is illegal to just go and download software and not having the appropriate rights to use it and then to install it on computers, and those companies can actually hold you liable for any damages. Depending on the license agreements, users might be given unlimited or limited use of the software. And generally speaking, when you buy and install it, they will tell you that you're allowed to install it on only 1 computer or 2 computers. Many people can use it at the same time, or only 1 person might use it. Some companies will also charge you for pay for usage, and this is nice if you have a company with a lot of users, but let's say for argument's sake, out of 1,000 employees, only 50 use it at a specific time point, then it's going to be cheaper to just have licenses for those 50. And then also important is once you've bought your software, you need to go and register and activate that software. And we found that companies has made it actually much more difficult to ensure that people don't go and steal their property and products. Now let's continue and talk about software upgrades. Software companies regularly go and improve their software, so it's important to go and look at the later versions, because from time to time you would find that they are going to provide you with new functionality, and it will come down to more benefits. There will be some new and valuable enhancements, and we need to ensure that, again, depending on our costs and our requirements, that we try to obtain the latest versions. Now, as indicated in the previous slide, some people tend to not work with the latest software. The reason being that they rather wait for certain bugs and problems to be resolved before they actually go and spend that money. It also can result in paying less for an older package, but in most cases you would find that companies would rather have people installing the latest versions. Now, if you're working in a company, it's important that you have an upgrade strategy and that you ensure that whenever the time permits, that you upgrade all the software on all the devices, and that you make sure that it runs effectively and smoothly in the organization. One of the last aspects that we need to talk about is global software support. Now, because a lot of the software are developed by international software developers, we do find that software support would be provided across the globe. So it is one of the biggest challenges that we face in the IS world, and we need to make sure that we do have people in place that can actually support all the customers around the world in order for them to use your software effectively. You would typically find that a lot of software would be outsourced, and that, for example, recently a lot of the call centers was actually moved to India, where it was cheaper and where they would have provided the technical support if you had any queries regarding software. So this concludes our discussion on software. So very importantly, take note, we've got system software, which relates to our operating systems, and we discussed application software, which was our more general applications.